Hi, I'm Katie Taylor, Senior Analyst with Tag Cyber, and I'm here today with Robert Steffen, the VP of Strategic Sales at ShardSecure. Robert, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're going to talk a little bit about ShardSecure and what you do and your platform. Let's start a little high level. So CISOs and their teams, even after years of cloud adoption, continue to have reservations about hosting enterprise assets in the public cloud. But with today's work from home environment, cloud has become an even bigger resource from a company perspective, but also a big risk, a major risk. And encryption of data hosted in public cloud has long been recognized as a primary control, but there are some drawbacks to traditional encryption. So can you help explain some of the objections that you typically hear when you're talking to clients and prospects about the use of traditional encryption?
Sure, great question. Traditional encryption and we call them legacy data security controls weren't built for the scale of the cloud and for running your applications and your business on somebody else's environment. So functionally, there's a breakdown in actually moving the data to the cloud and then ensuring that it's private and secure. So typical objections might be, hey, we're having enough trouble securing our data on premises. It's highly regulated data. We're having enough trouble with it. Moving it to the cloud is a whole new world to us, and we're not confident in our ability to secure the data there.
Has that become even a bigger conversation in these last 4 or 5 months since everyone's working from home now?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not just work from home. It's work from anywhere, right? Business needs to continue. Supply chains need resilience and 24/7 operations to keep up with demand, especially in the biotechnology space. What we're seeing now with research and nation state actors and a whole world of new threats that many of these companies just haven't dealt with in the past and they're not prepared to deal with. We've been able to help quite a bit there. So yes, there's been a massive uptick in the demand for security and privacy controls.
And I imagine because of the world we're in right now and everything's moving to the cloud, because that's a better way to scale for people working remotely from myriad and disparate locations, the question of risk becomes even bigger. Are you hearing anything specific from your clients, or is it just the overall, how do we deal with this in our new normal?
Right, it's both. I mean, so there's certainly a new risk that wasn't planned for, that many companies just didn't have the controls or the experience or expertise to really manage when it comes to the cloud. And yes, a massive uptick. It's everything from the employees sitting behind their home routers and the risks that are presented from their home network to communications with suppliers, manufacturers, vendors, distributors, everything across the supply chain is now happening remotely and in the cloud.
So you mentioned end users sitting in front of a desk somewhere, anywhere really, and a lot of the time when we're talking about security and access, we talk about front-end access as the primary security control, but ShardSecure takes a slightly different approach, securing back-end access. Can you talk a bit about that and why you as a company have chosen to focus there on the back end versus what we all typically think of as going in through the front door?
Absolutely. I mean, the front door is the initial vector for most attackers, right? And then they find a way to get to the crown jewels, which is the entire data set for these companies. And so but our focus needed to be innovating in the data protection space because the cloud backend is where the attackers, the cyber criminals, and other insiders potentially want to get to the data, right? More data is typically more valuable, right? The front end controls are there, right? And there are numerous ways to bypass those front end controls. I mean, most typically an attacker goes in, they want to compromise a privileged credential so that they can get access to either the front end, where data might be limited or separated. Typical zero trust models with separating the data from folks that shouldn't look at it in the first place is already there. But other means by which to get to the back end via hacks. I mean, we've seen kind of token hijacking. We've seen, public cloud exposure. There are a number of risks to the entire data set on the back end. And what we need to absolutely ensure is that the data itself is segmented at the atomic level, right? That a social security number isn't readable in a 9-digit or a 9-byte sequence, right? That data is stored in several different locations and that it's mixed in a way and poisoned in a way where the attacker can't establish any context or any real value out of the data itself. And that's why we decided to focus on the back end. We built a solution that can ingest data, compress it, shred it into tens of thousands, if not millions of pieces, depending on the size and file type, and then distribute it to many different locations where even the cloud provider can't read the data, can't make any sense of the data, right? Very important.
So you talk about distributing the data, you talk about shredding the data. Your company is ShardSecure, and sharding is not a new concept, but microsharding is unique to ShardSecure. It's trademarked, I believe. So can you explain what microsharding is and how it's different and how you do it?
Absolutely, and that's a great point. Sharding isn't new. Companies have been doing this for quite some time to optimize the storage and to increase performance, especially in the cloud. And that's what we've done. We've been able to do it at a much more atomic scale. With optimal performance, we are shredding files into 4-byte microshards, which are very small pieces of the larger data set. And then we're essentially shuffling them in a way that there's more of a random than readable sequence in any of the data. We're using compression, which is also a technology that has existed for quite some time to obfuscate the data and make the data smaller, right? Not only are we shredding it, we're making those shreds even smaller, shards even smaller. But we ingest that data and then we handle the data management on the back end. So if you've got one or more cloud providers, if you've got an on-premises or co-location type environment, we can essentially distribute the data to all of them in a way that makes not only that individual file unreadable in any location, it makes it incomplete. So we're talking about personally identifiable information or protected health information or anything that's under regulation, which is a growing number of things under Cloud Act, CCPA, GDPR. This is very challenging for most organizations, but ingesting that data and managing that data so that it does not sit in any kind of useful or valuable format.
So you're talking about distributing the data, you're talking about shredding the data. How is this helpful? I imagine it just makes it inaccessible or unavailable, even if somebody has admin access, even with a lot of privileges. This idea of microsharding helps keep it more secure so it's unreadable. Is that basically the concept here?
Absolutely. So if you think along the lines of an attacker, you think like an attacker if you were to run an op and steal credentials and keys and get that back-end access to public cloud infrastructure, which isn't incredibly difficult, and we see it reported almost every day. Making use of the data is problematic for them. I think they'd be surprised to see that essentially what they're looking at is junk. They will gain no understanding of what the data actually is. There are no file extensions. The data is not location aware, so they don't know where to get the rest of the data to make it complete. And so they're going to spend a lot of time and effort trying to break in, but once they do, there's really no value in that data there. And the same thing can be said for your cloud provider. I think we put, as an industry, far too much trust in the major cloud providers. They have privileged administrators that do very powerful things in the environment to keep it stable, to keep it patched, to keep the microservices running. And they also, by way of these this powerful access have access to the data itself. And so what you want to ensure is that whether it's an internal employee that does a very powerful thing in IT for your organization that enables your business to operate, that they cannot see the underlying data that per regulatory compliance must be private from them and must be private from the public and must be private from the cloud providers. We can enable all of that. So functionally, zero trust is the result for internal potential insider threats, right? I think most people are less likely to have a bad day and steal information from their company than they are to have their credentials compromised and then data stolen via that route. But yeah.
So it's a layered control essentially, because you've got the cloud provider and they are doing a good job of protecting the environment, but it's still up to the customer, the end user, putting their data, their applications in the cloud to do something about it. So it's a complement, no matter how good or bad the environment's security is, the end user in effect just has to place those layered controls no matter what.
Yeah, there are no existing solutions today to enable the separation of the underlying data from the folks that have powerful level of access to these environments.
So here's a functional question. We know encryption's good. We know people try to use it as much as possible. Does microsharding replace encryption?
I think for most companies, microsharding will be an augmentation. It'll be part of a defense in depth strategy. And frankly, just in time for the current market conditions of massive movement to the cloud. Really, it's putting the existing controls in place like encryption, HSMs, and other data protection controls that are typical in any checkbox compliance situation. We're going to start as an augmentation, and once they see the superior level of protection, the superior level of privacy, I mean, unprecedented level of privacy, and then ultimately the performance impact of our solution being increasing cloud performance instead of hindering cloud performance is going to be a massive play in this market.
So it's a multitude of things. It's security, it's privacy, it's compliance, it's risk. So a little bit of everything. Everything we really talk about in security, but isn't often easy to do. And we talked a little bit at the beginning of this conversation about traditional encryption and how even though everybody knows it's something they should be doing for all of their sensitive data all of the time, they don't because it's expensive, it's messy, it can be difficult to know where it is and what it is. So you've talked a lot about using ShardSecure and what it does in increasing performance, but what is the process if an enterprise wanted to come to you and start using ShardSecure and start microsharding? What does that mean? How easy, hard is it? Who has to be allocated to the project? How does it work?
Great question. Very simply, we're deployed as a virtual appliance, a containerized virtual appliance, and it's a cluster of appliances to ensure a high level of availability. It can be deployed in as little as an hour. And then what we'll do is we'll use APIs or SMB or NFS to ingest data from your front-end applications where you have employees or customers accessing their data or creating data that is ultimately stored in the cloud. We'll configure the back-end access for however many locations you have. That could be one or many different cloud providers. It could be an on-premises environment. It could be a combination of both. We configure the ShardSecure appliance to distribute the data in a very highly configurable way to all of those locations. And then functionally, we'll sit in the middle as a proactive automated control that ensures all the data is both private and protected. Very easy to deploy, very easy to manage. If we were to contrast the management, the ongoing operations of ShardSecure versus encryption, we're talking proactive and automated versus reactive and high touch. When new data is created, before it hits cloud storage, it is shredded to the point that it's not usable until it is accessed from those front-end applications or systems that you configured. So very light management.
Very light management, and you hold their hand all the way through until it's fully deployed.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that sounds great. Well, thank you, Robert, for speaking with us. I really appreciate taking the time to speak with me and share this information with our audience. I hope everyone listening enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for watching. And visit our friends at ShardSecure if you have any more questions.
Thanks, Katie.